Okay, welcome to WoodTALKS, everybody. Good morning. Our presenter today is Kelly Marcini. Kelly is the Vice President of Pan-Abode International, and Kelly is also a board member with the BC Log and Timber Builders Industry Association. Kelly strives to educate home and resort property owners about the long-term sustainability benefits of solid log construction. Welcome, Kelly.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ken. And thank you for hosting WoodTALKS over this past year. We're just chatting about how it's end of the fiscal and starting a new program next year. So we're looking forward to that. So as Ken mentioned, I'm working with Pan-Abode, but I'll also speak today generally about log buildings from my experience working with the BC Log and Timber Building Industry Association. So today's topic is specifically on lodges, cabins, and off-grid retreats. So what are some things that are different about designing, building with a prefabricated Western red cedar interlocking systems? So as Ken mentioned, we are recording. So if you have any questions, just send them over in the chat. I do have that up, so we'll be able to answer any questions for you, and happy to discuss with you later on as well if you're wanting to have a one-on-one conversation about a project or any details that you wanted to discuss. As well as I'll be able to share the slide deck and then the design guide for architects and designers that Pan-Abode has. I'll share those via email after the session. So learning objectives that we'll be covering today. So what are some of the designing and building advantages of using that prefabricated interlocking build systems, particular focus on places that are off-grid or remote builds. Talk about different common log species. Well, you know, I do think Western red cedar is the queen of the woods. There is definitely some different advantages about other wood species that are commonly used in log structures in Canada. Talked a little bit about sort of the process of making a machine milled log home and touch on a little bit on care and maintenance. We'll talk briefly about the whole carbon life cycle of a structure and why we need to be focusing more beyond just operating emissions. And then we'll finish up specifically talking about architectural design guidelines, some of the different design trends that we're seeing and how those impact your log structures. Okay, so types of remote buildings, when I talk about them, it's both commercial as well as residential. On the residential side, you know, depending on where you're located, they may be called cabins, cottages, camps, going to the lake. You know, we are seeing also wilderness getaways. And then there is a bit of a trend, even before COVID, is with second homes and people retiring into remote or rural locations. But often they're bringing a lot of the same amenities that they're used to in an urban, you know, household that they had before. So that's definitely something that's a little bit changing where, yes, the rustic cabin where you go away to retreat, but now we're also thinking about wider hallways and doorways and turning radiuses for wheelchairs as people age in place, you know, modern conveniences that people want to have in their structures. And then on the commercial side, same thing, you know, with Pan-Abode over the years, we have seen it evolved where previously when we thought of a lodge or a retreat in the wilderness, it was typically hunting or fishing were the two main activities. Now we're seeing wilderness nature getaways, photography, yoga, health, meditation retreats. So it's definitely expanded the type of commercial, you know, structure that suits this sort of off-grid and remote, as well as things like ranger stations and more general resorts too, where there may be a variety of activities taking place. With remote build projects is a few different challenges that occur. So one of them is figuring out how you actually get to site. You know, is there trucking available maybe only part of the way, then looking at barges, helicopter drops. And for some really challenging site, there may be the last, you know, 100 meters or further, that's actually walk-in only to it. So having a system that's prefabricated is going to be a huge advantage to these situations. And then in particular for something that's walk-in only, having something that doesn't require large equipment or cranes, and pieces that are easily handled by, 2 or 3 people are key. So that's where a log system that's prefabricated really starts to see an advantage over, panelized or large SIP panels for it. Do talk to whoever you're supplying with is what actually is included in that package. So again, everything, if you can simplify logistics, getting to a remote location is going to be advantage to you. So, in the case of Pan-Abode, we supply all the materials for the lockup stage of construction, including a lot of trim materials and interior doors, hardware, and so forth. So you get a fairly complete build without having to deal with a lot of different deliveries and different suppliers. Talk to your supplier about how they package up materials and weights. So, thinking about what your offloading equipment will be on site. With helicopters, often even time of year is going to impact how much weight that they can have. Barges, tides will make an impact. And then obviously, if you're hand carrying things, it might be that you're just actually cutting packages open and lifting off individual pieces for that last leg of the journey. Just a quick note on cedar. So one of the things about it is that it is lighter than a lot of the other softwood species that are used in log structures. So if you are hand carrying, it does make it easier that way. And then the fact that it is an interlocking system, so it does do much faster turnaround time. So if you do have a crew that's out there and you're paying for accommodations and meals and everything for them to be on site, going to prefabricated where you can turn around the project much faster, obviously saves you, a lot of time as well as money on the site and as part of the overall project. And then one thing to work with is in the design. There's even things in the design that we can do that'll actually make it the project go faster or require less equipment. So different styles of roof systems, as well as, if it's one or multiple stories are going to make an impact for it. So you may see this kind of roof ceiling style that we have here with the open beams, and then you'll see the cedar decking going across. You don't need a crane or heavy equipment to install that. A couple ladders and some people can lift it up, versus a system using trusses or even, mass timber sheets and so forth, where it's just a lot more equipment is required to be able to install that. Couple things, remote projects, some of the images there. So one thing here you'll see, this one's all loaded up on a barge here, and you can see everything is numbered. So that's one thing that we take a fair bit of care on, is all the packages are labeled. Every single log is actually labeled as well. So when you're putting it together, that it's in the right location and you're putting it in the right order. As well as if you have a very tight building site, is that which packages you need when. So we'll have them all listed out. Packages 9, 13, and 12 are for subfloor system. Okay, so you need to pull out those ones first and work on that first when you're actually on the build site. Items like windows and doors, they'll be all crated, but you'll know that, okay, we can put them in, say, dry storage, waiting until we have the rest of the structure ready for them. So it helps you manage on the build site as well with it. So lots of different ways to get out your project there. And definitely logistics is going to be one part of it in the overall scheme of things. With off-grid, I often will find customers mean two things that they're kind of going at it. Is one is people that they are intending to have very minimal electricity, if at all. Sometimes it's just LEDs, solar lights, something like that. And so, getting that speed to a lockup shelter is really important for them, as well as that all the pieces are going to be pre-cut, pre-sanded. A lot of that work that might take tool use on site is eliminated. So, it is ideally, even if you have some hand tools that you can use that maybe are, with battery packs, because there'll be some drilling, there'll be a little bit of sawing, stain will go faster if you spray on. But it is sort of one thing to consider. But if you don't have power on site, these are some of the things that are going to eventually help you out. And then if you do have some power, then you're going to be looking at some of the different tools. We do have a pretty short tool list of what is required, and working with your builder or assembly team for that. And then also just always check is what actually is required for code. I know we've worked on a number of projects where they think no electricity, okay, I don't have to worry about meeting electrical permits and electrical inspections, when in fact that it is still required for it. And you may need to have it sort of electricity ready, even if there's not an intention to actually connect it to a grid or a power source. Then we have sort of our other type of clients there, when they say off grid, all they mean is they're not connected to pole power coming up to them. They have generators, they have all sorts of backup power, cascading that they're going to be able to use, battery packs, and the potentially need storage for all of that. In addition to, they're expecting all the modern conveniences with that. So a very different kind of approach. So I always try to clarify, what truly is meant by off-grid when they say that, and what that term means, and how it'll impact the project. So I don't see any questions in the chat, so I'll just keep sort of going here. Talking about, next topic is wood species and how we actually process and make a materials package. So in Canada, the three main species that'll be used for log structures will be Western red cedar, white pine, and Douglas fir. Will be the main common ones. Log structures and buildings and homes have been around for thousands of years. And typically what's been used is what's locally available. So that's no different here in Canada, where these are commonly grown species in different regions. And that's reflected in what is used. So Western red cedar, typically, well, it's only found here on coastal species, sort of British Columbia and a little bit further south. And it is a tougher tree to grow, and it takes longer to get large. And so we're definitely seeing that in pricing and availability compared to, say, white pine, which grows readily, it grows rapidly, but it also has some other challenges where it's not, it doesn't, the maintenance schedule is more frequent with pine than something like Western red cedar, which is naturally resistant to rot and mildew and decay. And then you also have sort of in the middle is Douglas fir. Douglas fir is really strong. For Pan-Abode, we actually will use Douglas fir beams in our roof system. Currently mostly a glue laminated, but we will do the full timbers for Douglas fir as well, because they do have that extra strength compared to the cedar. And so a good guide that you can access is the Canadian Wood Council. I've just included their link down in the bottom. And they actually have a number of different wood species that you can access and learn about, different applications for it. What does it look like? How does it perform? And so you're able to pick, based on your project, what species you're wanting to use. And for many different log builders, often they're only working with one, maybe two different species. And so if you have a specific species you want to use, you may start with that first, and to narrow your choices down of supplier. Next one is just a quick touch on sustainability with it. So I do encourage you to also ask about this when you're talking with your suppliers, is where are they sourcing their materials from? Typically, if it's going to be, I'd say almost 100% guaranteed here in British Columbia and Canada, you're going to be having a sustainable forest management program that it's coming from. We do have fairly stringent laws in Canada related to forestry, and particularly in British Columbia with a very, I would say, professional forestry industry, with wood scientists and engineers and a whole forestry regulated profession that we have here. And we particularly see this as, comparing ourselves to the United States, or where they have, or other parts of the world where we're often asked the question, is it legally harvested, or, where is it coming from? As well as the avoidance of plantation style growing, where it's basically, a monoculture with a lack of other biodiversity that's growing there for, wildlife and humans to enjoy, and all the other benefits of a real forest. And again, lots of resources through naturallywood.com that you can access if you're, if you have clients or yourselves that are looking for more information on forests in Canada. Next sort of thing here, so we have the forest, we're able to harvest, and then what happens next will typically going to be is how do they dry the logs to get it down to the right moisture content. So a log, once we get it, it could be 30+% moisture content. And usually you're wanting to get it below 19% or even further, where you're actually getting the water out of the cells and you're able to have any of that shrinking that might cause checking and cracks and other sort of issues in the wood are dealt with early on before you're actually putting it into the structure. The BC Log and Timber Building Association did a life cycle analysis study a few years ago, looking at different methods of building a log home. So the handcrafted, the timber frame, and the machine milled. And about a third of the impact between these different homes and different styles was just that choice of either air drying or kiln drying the wood. So the air dry, it does take a long time. Pan-Abode, we're having timbers that we're buying 6 to 9 or even more months in advance till we get it down to the moisture content that works for our profile. Versus kiln drying, where it's rapid, but one of the challenges because it's rapid is that you can get some degrading in the quality of the log structure, as well as the knot quality can degrade, where you get something called star checks, where you get these little cracks, and you may be able to get wood bugs or water bugs, other things will start to kind of get in there versus a nice piece of wood that's been air dried and doesn't have any cracking or checking into it. So definitely, again, sort of one thing to ask and be considering, especially as we are having more and more customers are asking for environmentally friendly options that are out there. Just a quick photo here is just air drying for us. We actually have a little machine that tells us the moisture content. But even just visually, when we see them up there, that the ones that are still tight with the bands, you can tell that they're still a little bit swollen with moisture. And then the bands actually start to loosen as the logs will shrink down. And we get it down. Visually, we can kind of see where it is, and then we'll use our little moisture meter to actually get the actual moisture content before we send it for profiling. So let's talk about profiles. So that'll be the other thing. So you talk about wood species, sort of narrowing down your choice of supplier. The next one would be your log profile. Often, maybe again, one, maybe two different profiles that a log supplier will do. And these are the most common ones that are out there. So Swedish cope and round, as the name implies, will have that round look to it. You will, if it's machine milled, it will be a pretty smooth surface. And then as soon as you're going to have that handcrafting to it, you're going to have the different marks of the tools for it. Then you're going to have your D log. I always call this the compromise log. So you have the round on one side that usually goes to the exterior, and then you're going to have your flat on the other side, and that's usually on the interior of the home. And then you have your square log or rectangle log, typically going to have flat sides. In the case of Pan-Abode, we have a slight profile to it, and we find that actually sheds water. And then on the far side here is our handcrafted. And with a handcrafted, a lot of different styles that are out there. It is very much an art. So picture here shows different diameters of logs. Sometimes they'll have very even, where all the logs are roughly the same size. And you also can have all sorts of different ends. In this case, that they're going to just be a flat cut. Other times you'll see something where they have a burl, or you actually see some of the root structure that's still attached. So there's some really neat things that you can do there if you're wanting to something that's quite special with the handcrafted. And then this is also a good example where you can see where I was talking about these cracks that can occur in the structure. So these cracks here are part of the natural drying. And a lot of the handcrafted, they will do something they'll call force a check, where they will force a check to occur in a specific location that works best for the overall structure. And then you can put some sort of gasketing or insulation into there. Another way of doing it with, which is the approach that Pan-Abode takes, is that we do our logs as only as free of heart center. So we're only taking the outside edges around the log, and instead of when it's drying, it'll sort of dry like this, and then you may get a crack occurring. Our logs are only going to be off to the side here with the free of heart center. And so we'll just get a bit of a vertical as it dries. And so we'll have a little bit of shrinkage, but we're not going to get that cracking issue that occurs with some of the round logs, or logs that use the heart center within their product. So the machine milling, modern factories are used. So, it'll be a uniform shape. It's going to have a precise fit. It's not like the handcrafted are usually pre-built, put all together on site, and then disassembled and then reassembled on the project site. With the machine milled, they skip that whole step. So there's no pre-assembly required. We know everything's going to fit because it has a precise fit, actually down to a millimeter tolerance that we have. And so that quality control is there, as well as that speed of manufacturing that we can do, fairly voluminous projects because we're using this modern factory and machinery that we have. So we'll go into a few of the different build systems. So once you've harvested the wood, you've dried it, you've profiled it, now you have going into how you're actually going to assemble the structure with it. So these are the most common styles that we see. And there's lots of variation here. Again, going back, log structures have been around for thousands and thousands of years. So lots of ways people have come up with, and some pretty fancy joinery that you can do. But these are the most common ones that you'll probably be coming across. So butt and pass is the most simple. It actually uses two different lengths of logs. And one sits, instead of going over or locking in place, it actually just sits with gravity over top. And then you're going to have your next one and one on top of the other going back and forth. And then as the name implies, they butt up against that other alternative one. So you have a pass and then a butt and then a pass and then a butt. Typically, you're going to have some more hardware here because, there is a possibility that these things will come apart because there's not any sort of joinery keeping them together. And so, that is fairly simple, but, there's sometimes simple isn't always necessarily the best because you're going to have this other hardware that is required. Next one over is saddle notch. So saddle notch typically uses the Swedish cope log profile, where you're going to have your round profile, and then you're going to have a bit of a crescent shape taken out of the bottom. And then so it nice and fits on top of the log below it. And then you're able to pass another log over top. And so instead of, there's no logs that butt against each other, they're all passing over one over the other with it. The next one down on the bottom corner here is our corner post. A corner post is where, as the name implies, you're going to have a post, and then you're going to have, usually there's going to be some sort of slotting or notches that are done, and then your logs are going to be coming down into them that way. Next one over is your dovetail. Your dovetail, as the name implies, there is kind of a tail that's coming off of it. And so it's wider on the end. And so when you have the next log going over top, it makes it very challenging for it to pull apart because you're basically acting like a stopper on the end there. This is when you're definitely going to see some different variation on in different styles. And then you have your interlocking, where it's a bit of a combination of the saddle notch and the dovetail but you are going to have cutouts both on the top and the bottom. And so when it comes together, it locks in place, and it is actually very challenging to pull it apart. If you're wanting to take it apart, you basically have to start at the top and just take off one course after another and work your way down to whatever log it is. Like if you put one in the wrong place or something there. Just quick one, how it all kind of fits together there. Everything will be all pre-cut. And so, including openings for archways and windows and doors will all be in place. So when you're putting it together, pieces will be cut already for those openings. Okay, seeing if there's any questions, definitely feel free to drop them in the chat. I will endeavor to answer them as we go here. So now you've built the structure, now you got to take care of it. So again, going back to us being a remote and potentially off-grid site, so care maintenance can obviously be challenging if it's not easy to get a crew to go out there and do quick little touch-ups. So having a structure that kind of takes care of itself, so to speak, is going to obviously be an advantage for you. For the care and maintenance, one thing to think about is log profile. So often we kind of hear from people that have had round logs in the home previously is that debris kind of can build up on it. So you may get more dusting. On the outside, you may get more leaf debris and other things that are accumulating on it versus the square logs where it'll just shed that naturally. A point about staining. Nowadays, we typically do recommend giving it a stain, even on the outside, to protect it from UV and water. On the inside, it's more common to do a clear coat, particularly washrooms, kitchens, any high touch, high traffic areas. And then on the graying, that is one thing that people really like about cedar, is that it does do that naturally sort of silvery gray. And there's even products that you can get that actually stain it a very similar color, but still provide that UV and water protection for the longevity of the product. But if you do have a project that they do just leave natural, cedar is going to be the one that's going to be lasting the longest in those type of environment, as well as it will actually quite nicely, giving it a sand and opening that back up. And then giving it a stain, then you can actually revive an older cedar structure. With pretty good results for it. Point on seasoning is something that you may hear that as settling, seasoning, the drying of a structure. So we talked about air drying or kiln drying to get down to a set moisture content. Once it actually gets into the build site, it's been put together, and now you're heating it on the inside, you are going to get a little bit more shrinkage. And that'll kind of depend on a number of factors. For the Pan-Abode log system, with our 4x6 Western red cedar logs, we're going to have maybe another 1/8 of an inch per log that's going to occur. And so we have a natural or built-in ability for the structure to handle that settling. And so you'll have a little bit different details around windows, around doors, around the roof system to accommodate that. As well as there's going to be these through bolts that'll be going from just sort of the roof line and coming all the way down through the structure, and it'll come up through the bottom. And nowadays we have a self-tightening bolt. So, there's no more having to go, people are familiar with old Pan-Abodes where you had a little screw system where you go in and hand tightened. It now does it for you. So you're not having to worry about that. Particularly locations where there is a big moisture content between different seasons, you can get a bit of that shrinkage and swelling that's occurring, even years after the initial drying of the structure. Windows, doors, roof, foundation, obviously those are all different components to the structure as well that may have their own care and maintenance schedules. And typically are going to be pretty similar to other conventional structures that you may have come across. Another good plug for an industry resource is realcedar.com. And they have a whole bunch of resources on care and maintenance of cedar that you can access. So a good one to share with your team. Okay, so we'll just briefly touch about this. I know this is you know, I've heard definitely a lot of people are learning about this more now. And I wouldn't say it's not always the elephant in the room anymore. So we've been really good on operating carbon. You know, we're trying to reduce our energy consumption in structures, really sort of thinking about, you know, high R value and heat pumps and a number of these types of things. However, we do also need to think about the sequestering carbon potential that happens with log structures, as well as the embodied carbon. So the embodied carbon is all of that carbon that's actually used within the creation of that structure, as well as eventually, you know, decommissioning it. So this is kind of the cycle that we go through here. We're starting with the raw materials. So in the case of wood structure, it's actually sequestering while it's growing. And then you're going to have your harvesting, and then all the way through your transport, you know, the manufacturing that's occurring, transport, construction to site. Again, because it's prefabricated, you're going to actually have less transport, less materials all the way, less material you're going to have to haul out as well. Then you're going to have the eventual deconstruction of the structure. So what happens at end of life? Log buildings are well known for being able to have an extended longevity. That's often why they're called a legacy structure. So it's something that, you know, in families, they give on to their children and grandchildren. You know, a lot of the resorts and lodges and stuff, they do see this as sort of a showcase or a piece that they can have for a long time through the life of the property. And a neat thing with log structures, a lot of it can be reused. So we're definitely, you know, with Pan-Abode, we're seeing probably, I'd say at least once a month, you know, a project coming through where they're going to be doing some deconstruction for the project, and then reusing the logs, either rebuilding exactly the same or, you know, with modifications that you know, we can help them plan. And then, yeah, then you have your operating. So actually what's the structure, what energy kind of use is it having? Everything from heating, cooling, ventilation, you know, lighting, all of the other things that come into there. Okay. So sequester carbon. Yeah, so if people don't sort of know what that is, so it's just actually how the plants use and create energy. So they'll actually absorb carbon. So they'll absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and they use it actually in their growth. So through photosynthesis, they separate out the carbon and the oxygen. The oxygen is a waste that they expel. Great for animals because we actually use that, you know, opposite cycle to bring in to our bodies. And then that rest of that carbon is actually used as a building material. Just like we use it as a building material, trees and plants use it as a building material, that it's in their leaves, its branches, its roots, system, you know, everything is made of carbon there. Typically it's about 50% of the weight of, you know, a log or a structure is, or a wood structure is going to be carbon in there. And it's going to be stored in there until it either burns or composts. So this is why when people talk about the best value or the best use of a forestry product, where they're looking for long life products. So if you're able to sequester and then store that carbon in buildings, furniture, infrastructure, that stores it much longer than using it for, you know, disposable products like tissues and biofuels and all these kind of things where, you know, it goes quite rapidly through the cycle. So every tree should be used, you know, best value of what we can get out of it for the structure. Excuse me. On the embodied carbon, I think I covered most of that there. Lots of good researchers that are out there, particularly that, again, another one with natural wood, talking sort of about embodied carbon and how that all works and how it relates to infrastructure. Our operating carbon, especially with step code, that's definitely the current focus of the BC Energy step code that we have. Okay, so for next topic, let's talk about, let's delve into specifically now uses of wood here in structures. So I'm obviously talking mostly about Pan-Abode here. That's that kind of structure and that we have here in the bottom. but we also have in British Columbia a few other good examples of structures that are, I think helping us, and buildings and construction industry being part of the solution. So another good tall example is in Vancouver, where we have Tall House at UBC, which is using mass timber. I think it's currently the second tallest structure in the world, and that's made of wood. And there's another one, I think in Japan, that's being built right now that'll be taller. But I think this is something that British Columbia is definitely taking the lead on, and as well as large spans. So not just going high, but also going wide. And so up in Prince George, we have the Wood Innovation Center. And as you can see in the picture, some really big wide spans. So you can do some neat things with the structures that we have for them. Okay. So we talk about sustainable and that legally harvested wood, especially because it is going to be using less total carbon and concrete, steel, glass, most other building materials there. So definitely something to sort of go through and calculate as one more consideration in the overall project. And just to point out, about wood being a very versatile product. So you'll see I have a couple photos coming up I'm going to show of some of these different uses of wood in a Pan-Abode structure, where so many different materials are actually wood or wood-based, where instead of using a plastic or metal alternative for it, as well as the waste being an input into others. So Pan-Abode, we're part of the Aspen Planers group of companies, and all of our sister companies are all wood value add businesses as well. And some of our waste products are actually, we sell them to our sister company, and then their input into their products. And so it's not ending up in landfill. It's actually being reused and just keeps circulating with it. So that's definitely a neat thing that I like about the wood structures that we have. Another thing is that high efficiency in manufacturing. So you definitely going to be overall using less energy, less carbon output compared to doing on-site construction, which, yes, there's been advances, but it's still inefficient compared to what we can do in a manufacturing setting. And then, I already talked about, the waste is going to be different on the prefab, as well as Pan-Abodes, as well as other log structures can be deconstructed and reassembled. So there's still value in the material, even after the end of life of the building. A neat tool Canadian Wood Council that is your carbon calculator. It's actually free to use. You just take your bill of materials, and then there's a number of just different sort of prompts that you fill out indicating what wood material it is, the volume that you had, and it'll calculate for you, creating that structure using wood rather than concrete, steel, and other materials. And what's the both the volume of wood that it gives you, how much carbon is stored in there, and then it also does some little offsets of saying, well, this is equivalent to taking so many cars off the road, or so many homes get heated for a year. So it gives you a nice talking point for your customers, as well as the ability to try different things. So if you're wanting to reduce the overall carbon impact of the structure, and then, for a lot of people, cost is obviously still a consideration, you're able to do some different uses and trade off different things there, and actually be able to play with the numbers and figure out, okay, it's going to cost me 10% more in material cost, but I'm reducing our environmental impact by 25%. Bring that case to our customers, and they're able to go, okay, yes, that makes sense for me. This is something that I wanted to do. And then we're able to, continue to go on forward with the project. Okay, so I see the question here just about pricing. So what I can do, hey, it ranges a lot depending on what kind of structure you're doing. So we do have homes that are, and buildings that are almost all cedar, all exterior walls, all interior walls, the whole entire roof system. And that's going to be, I'd say, our most expensive per square foot that you're going to be having. And then you're going to have your structures that we do have a system that uses framed interior walls and then a truss roof. And so you're going to then finish, either drywall, or we do have cedar siding or V-joint that you can cover with it. But that's a way to kind of keep some of the material costs down. Though, yeah, there's going to be more labor costs of actually putting it together. Usually we work out in the same ballpark as a custom framed home. But you're going to be spending more money on materials and less money on labor to actually get it assembled and built. And then and then you're going to have your finishing costs on top of that. So things like counters, flooring, lighting, electrical fixtures, plumbing, all that type of stuff will be sort of separate. And those prices are pretty standard of whatever else you're going to have as a comparable type of structure. And then if you had any particular homes that if you had a project you wanted us to price out for you, we're happy to do custom rough estimates. And before we actually get into, custom designing something, we can just take a sketch. We can go, okay, this is a ballpark of how much it's going to be. Happy to do that with your projects, or talk with you about some other specific designs that you may see on our website, as a starting point as well. So we kind of approach it two different ways, depending on your needs. Okay, perfect. Okay, so trends and styles that we're seeing here. So this is a great report. Actually, the American Institute of Architecture does these quarterly surveys, and the results they actually publish for free. I think it's something about 6,000 responses that they usually get. So it's quite, it's a good sample size to kind of go through of what's happening there. So no surprise there. Home offices have been on the increase. A big part of it coming from COVID, but also some of those trends we were already seeing. So I talked about these, people from urban environments moving into rural, where they're often bringing in, modern conveniences such as a home office for it. This outdoor living is very popular with log home structures and buildings, where they want that kind of indoor-outdoor space that we achieve with lots of French doors or terrace doors, and wide verandas and porches and decks space, so people can kind of have that feel of going back and forth. Mud rooms are really popular. So typically we're seeing in a lot of cold environments where it's snowy conditions, but even in places where it's raining a lot, it's kind of nice to be able to come in, get rid of the wet clothes before going into the rest of the structure. It's also really good for energy efficiency too, of kind of having that airlock where you're kind of coming into one room, have that other door closed. You close the outside door before you're making your way the rest of the way in. And then that sort of sunroom, 3-season porch, again, very, very popular in a lot of the log home designs. A lot of these things, I think, are applicable to any kind of structure, but it is something, again, we're seeing as well. So that first floor primary bedroom, or having that master suite on the main floor, wider hallways, wider doorways. So just generally that aging in place considerations. It's actually something Pan-Abode, we've actually put together a little checklist of things for people to consider, because we are getting in the question more and more. And then I mentioned easy to use features, handles. Pan-Abode, we provide hardware in our kits, and lever handles are actually the style that we use as our base, but there's some other choices that you have there too. Okay, on different styles of homes. So mentioning just contemporary home styles. So log homes and structures, people often think of them as being traditional or classic, but there's actually a lot of contemporary that you can do there. Pan-Abode, for our 70th anniversary, we actually launched a contemporary series, and actually have, it's probably almost 50-50 now that we do a contemporary home versus a more traditional style. And particularly with those square or rectangle size logs, it does have that kind of modern, sleek look to it. So, so different flexibility and styles that you can have. Front porches, side porches, again, very common with us. That custom design, that is what we do. Most log buildings are custom done. So you do have a lot of flexibility there in what you're trying to have for the overall project. Yeah, simple detailing, and then single story homes, which I think is often related to that aging in place. I just wanted to touch on windows on, number and size. For us, we're seeing two different trends. We see people going smaller windows. So thinking about energy efficiency and having a small window to wall ratio. The other one that we're seeing is big walls of windows, and people spending still high performance windows that they want and spending a larger portion of their budget on having those windows. So some neat things that we can do with log structures is often having a framed loft or second story, which means we can put much larger windows, as well as rake windows and some round windows and some different designs there. So windows are definitely something that we're seeing change on, but kind of going in two different ways, at least for the projects that we've been doing in the last few years. Okay, let's talk a little bit about thermal performance. So you've probably very familiar with R values or RSI, and what we're doing is wood is much better than concrete and steel and a lot of the other assemblies that you can have there. And then, so the BC Log and Timber Building Industry Association, just over the last couple of years, has been doing some new research with Natural Resources Canada on, and particularly for cold weather environments, what is the actual effective value of the different log assemblies. And so they looked at 5 different assemblies in a few different sizes of Western red cedar and Douglas fir. And they actually found the results being 20 to 40% better for the R value than what was previously given through the hot box testing back in the 1950s. It was the last time that this was done on a large scale. And so in a typical home, you're looking at an energy efficiency score improvement of anywhere from 2 to 6%. So that can mean a difference of, are you going to be a step 3 home, or, are you going to be pushing yourself into a step 4? And so if you are wanting to license those, you can just contact the BC Log and Timber Industry Association, and they can actually, they got a licensing agreement and stuff that you can work with them to get it either per project or on an annual or lifetime basis, depending on what works for your firm. So that's definitely sort of something to think about. The other sort of thing there is thermal mass, which is not used in the calculations for BC Energy Step Code. And I actually am aware of actually any of the codes that will use that K value calculation, but it is real. It is something we over and over hear from our customers, is the warmth that they feel, as well as the heat is more consistent. So instead of having kind of hot pockets or having the furnace turning on and off with the frame construction, having that big thick layer of log around them actually retains that heat and will radiate it back into the night with it. So definitely places where there's a big temperature change between daytime and nighttime, it's even more felt. But this is something that's going to be impacting most structures in Canada for sure. Natural movement I've mostly covered here. So talking about settling movement, I just wanted to talk about color changes as well as sounds and scents. So with scents, cedar does have a smell. So if your customer or client isn't not used to cedar or hasn't come across it, definitely talk to us. We have these kind of actually slices off of our logs that we have, and they smell wonderful. So if you're wondering, okay, is cedar something that I can want as an overall structure and be smelling on a regular basis, do talk to us. I can source some of these for you, for your client, as well as if they wanted larger pieces, like some of our architects we work with, we actually will provide them kind of bigger pieces of log so they can kind of see how things fit together as well. But that's all, something we can go there. And then sound, You will, with the movement, sometimes get some creaks and some groans as the structure moves, and that's normal. That's just part of a log structure and building that you're going to have. And then those color changes. So I talked a bit about that silvering that will happen over time with the cedar, but again, a lot of people think that's, you know, quite attractive too. Yeah, just this briefly, just kind of showing like so much wood in the structure that that we have. Okay, our design guide. So this is something we developed from feedback that we had from architects we were working on, is that they appreciated that we would take one of their designs and convert it into the Pan-Abode building system. But some of them actually wanted to play around with it themselves. They wanted to use the building system and come up with their own designs. And so that's where our design guide, you know, came from. So it kind of goes through all the different guides, as well as in some case rules that you need to follow, such as size of openings, you know, spacing of where logs, you know, intersect, all of that for you, as well as some of the other different, you know, components that would be going into the structure. It kind of outlines different material choices and colors and things that you can choose from. So it's a really good sort of starting place. You're able to kind of go through with your client and actually come up with a, you know, a unique design that works for them. We're still going to go through it and actually, you know, potentially redraw it. You know, that is something that, you know, we want to obviously make sure that, you know, there were no little details were missed. But it's a really good starting point for you to work with and have your own creativity stamped right on it. And this is something I'm going to share with you after. So not only the slide deck, but I'll share the design guide with you as well. So we're just going to talk through a few projects here. And again, happy to answer questions in the chat that you may have along the way here. So this is a design that we did where we worked with an architect that they came up with a design for the client. And they already had another Pan-Abode on that property. So they went into it going that they were going to want to have a Pan-Abode structure. But they did a lot of different things with it. So one of them is what they call a hybrid design here, where we do have some timber framing as part of the structure. They've also used some different exterior finishes where we've done what we call framed gables. So instead of doing a log gable, they've done framing, and then they've done this different type of material, the burnt shakes going across it. And then you'll see, yeah, huge deck space as well. So Pan-Abode well, we'll always design a deck into the structure, and then, yeah, supplying the materials will be just an optional accessory. But we do great decks too, even though I'm trying to tell you about homes here and buildings, but our decks in Western Red Cedar. And yeah, so this large structure here, really big on the patio, lots of glazing space for it. And then they did a different kind of ceiling finish as well. So instead of getting the cedar finish from us, they just did a white pine where they ended up just painting it. So they had a really bright interior, all being white here, and a lot of different finishes on the walls as well. They've done a lot of stone treatments. So in this project here, so another one, this is a remote location that was an island build, just a coastal here. So one of the things that they did is really widened out the soffits coming off of the eave side. And so they could actually walk through around the whole structure without getting rained on. So that was part of it, is sort of thinking through the use of the building over time. And they had a focus on these large windows there. So we did a framed upper story. And so they could put these large rake windows into that structure. You can just see them in from the inside. And again, you know, this one, they did a drywall ceiling rather than doing the V-joint or the cedar decking. So lots of flexibility that you can do in your designs. So this one here was just highlighting some of the different styles of beamwork, this one. So they went much more rustic. And so sourcing different logs, materials to hold up this deck system. And you'll see, I'm not sure about on the interior as well, railings and the staircase, again, were very rustic, you know, mix of the sleek Pan-Abode logs and then that handcrafted look of some of the larger log feature areas. just the different roof system there, as well as a lot of the other wood detailing here in the doors and the trim and throughout the structure that we have. Yeah, and actually one other one we often get questioned about is crown molding as well as baseboard. So for the crown molding, our standard will be a quarter round, a nice thick quarter round that'll be going around. But some people will actually upgrade and do a wider trim. And so that in cedar, that's something that we can work with you on. And then around the base, again, usually what people are included in our package will be the quarter round going around where the log wall meets the floor. But again, we can do that if you're wanting to have a thicker baseboard to go around too. So lots of flexibility there and details. So I think we're just close on time here. So happy to answer other questions for you. Feel lots of different ways to reach out and connect with us. And yeah, thank you very much for joining us on WoodTALKS and learning a bit about using prefabricated log building structures. And as I say, the Queen of Wood, Western Red Cedar is definitely one to consider.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Kelly. If anybody would like to stick around and speak to Kelly, please do. Also, before you go, I'd like to mention that Pan-Abode is the main sponsor at the Cottage Life Show. It's a national event. It's virtual this year, March 26, 27, 28. You go to cottagelife.com and it's free registration. And it's a great show. And I don't see any more questions, but again, please stick around if you'd like to speak to Kelly, and have a great day. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.